Welcome to the 48th. He's Kurt Davis. I'm Frank Camacho. We don't agree on a whole lot of things politically, but we do invite you to sit down and join us as we chat about the events of the week.
Frank.
Way to the right. There's been a lot of things to disagree on this past week. The state passed a budget, which I think kind of reeks and kind of sucks. And if this is supposed to be a document of our priorities, then obviously education is not a priority, and corporate tax giveaways are a priority.
Ever being spent on education before is what this budget is. It's a follow-through on a commitment
it's
that we're
a mirror
that other things were going to get cut so that you could actually fund education. It's an increase in education funding. It's an increase in the percentage of the state's budget that goes to education. I don't know if that's, I don't know how much stronger you can lay that as a priority.
Well, I mean, if you talk about what about the $100 million? I mean, we didn't even get to the fact that there's going to be a lot of folks, because of some of the cuts they did to Medicaid, to access, that there's going to be a lot of folks that maybe their health insurance is going to be in jeopardy.
Well, their cuts on the provider side.
But why should they be placed in jeopardy while those tax giveaways are still in place?
If you have $1 billion problem, you have to have $1 billion solution. Our Constitution requires that the budget, the Constitution provides the budget has to be balanced. We're not like the federal government where we can just print money, drive up costs to taxpayers. They actually have to balance the budget, just like people at home have to balance their budget. That's what they did. Was it fun? No. Is it tough on people? Absolutely. But the budget has to be balanced.
It wasn't tough on a whole lot of businesses, though.
I don't think that, I mean, business is paying corporate tax. They help fund our state's budget.
When you have a conservative, a fiscal conservative like Bob Robb say that, guys, you need some increase on the revenue side.
I think there was discussion actually about revenue increases. The bottom line is that there needs to be structural changes in education finance. Absolutely, you can look at the structure of how we derive revenue. That's not a legislative session issue. That's a year-round off-session issue.
The backers of this budget seem to be giving us the same line that you can't raise taxes. Trust us, if we cut business taxes and whatnot, it's going to trickle down. It's going to increase revenues. It's going to do this and do that.
Just like that
been doing that. Wait a minute.
Just like that right-winger John F. Kennedy said.
But we've been doing it for years and years and years, and it hasn't worked.
That's not true. Frank, that's just not true.
Okay.
When you cut a tax, it's not an immediate impact. It does have to bleed through the economy over time. If you want to raise taxes in a fairly unstable economy, and you want to drive revenues down, raise taxes, because that's what's going to happen. It's a very delicate balance.
Yeah, just level out the playing field, though. I mean, you're going to cut people's benefits, and you're going to give.
They're cutting provider. Now, remember, providers got an increase on Medicaid expansion. They're cutting back some of that. But again, you have to find $1 billion. And they did.
There was $100 million there that they could have gotten, but they didn't. Let's move on to another subject. The president coming to Phoenix to the VA.
$2 million trip to warm weather.
Wait a minute. You criticize him because he doesn't stop to the VA. Now you're going to criticize him because he does come to the VA?
Yeah, he could have done a twofer last time he was here, but his people weren't smart enough to actually have him stop as he drove by.
So he's coming now. So what does it matter as long as he's here now?
It's fine. It's going to be great. He's going to talk about all the changes that have been made and how good they are, and we're going to pay for it. But that's fine.
Don't we owe that to the veterans, though?
Yeah, he could have stopped when he was here last time. He apparently didn't care enough to stop.
As long as he does it now, what difference does it make?
It's fine. He's going to be here, and we're going to all suffer the traffic.
Just like the 47 senators who signed that letter to Iran. I mean, that was a real smart move.
You and I agree on that one. We absolutely agree. The president has responsibility for the establishment of foreign policy and to negotiate treaties. The Senate could not vote to support the treaty, and my guess is Iran probably has leadership that's smart enough to know that the current treaty they may be working on or agreement may not pass the Senate.
And considering the fact that probably anything that the president does, these folks are not going to like it.
But I agree with you. It's not appropriate.
Do you think there's going to be any long-term effects of that? Is there going to be ramifications?
No. I mean, and you brought up previously, they stepped on the on the Hillary Clinton story.
Exactly.
Hillary was churning up the headlines. It was a good week for Republicans as she was trying to hide her email communication, and they stepped on that story. So it was a twofer, a twofer of ineptitude on that one.
Don't these folks, I mean, what goes on back there? You visit Washington more so than I do. What goes on over there?
Well, it just shows you that it's really hard to herd cats, and they're not doing a good job of herding them. They got off message, and Hillary had an awful press conference, awful press conference. I think she's in real trouble. You have a wing of the Democrat Party that I think is driving that to drive her out of the race, clear the way for Elizabeth Warren, who's the preferred candidate.
Yeah.
I love it, absolutely.
Because it's going to be easier for?
She's going to make many of the GOP candidates viable if she's the nominee of the Democrat Party.
Sounds like Mission Impossible with some of those guys.
We're going to see. It's just starting.
Yeah, it is.
Hillary's supposed to announce in April. We'll see if she actually does.
If she's running. See that Saturday Night Live bit a couple of weeks ago where if I'm running, I'll do this. If I'm running, but who knows? You know, it was hilarious. You know, just as a kind of a prelude to that press conference.
It's Washington politics. It's gone crazy. It's hard to figure out who's on first, who's on second. It just continues, the nonsense in Washington.
And there are a lot of issues facing the city of Phoenix, which is much like that. It's like everywhere you turn, there's another issue there. And we'll talk to the man who's in charge of the city government over there, City Manager Ed Zuercher, when the 48th continues.
The 48th is presented in part by Eastmark, the mark of something special, currently offering over 30 beautiful new quick move-in homes.
Welcome back to the 48th, and our guest tonight is Mr. Ed Zuercher, the city manager for Phoenix. Ed, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And there's a myriad of issues that are facing the city of Phoenix. Let's start with the one I think that really affects a lot of directly the budget. A lot of these issues do affect the budget, but the one with the public safety and the pensions, especially with police and fire. Where do we stand in that right now?
Sure. Well, we just released a status report for our city budget, and the good news is that we're balanced, that we've made some early decisions. The mayor and the council made some tough choices last year to bring ourselves into balance for this year. But we do have some warning signs on the horizon related to pensions. Now, on the civilian pension, which the city controls, there's been a lot of reform done, about $800 million worth of reform.
Wow.
And that is paying off in a leveling off of our civilian pension costs. But the public safety pensions, which is a statewide system, has not done the same level of reform. And we are facing a $25 million increase next year, a $20 million increase the following year, and a $15 million increase the following year. So about $60 million over a 3-year increase in our public safety pension costs. That's something we're really going to have to dig into.
And that's just to catch it up, right?
That's just to catch up. That's exactly right, Kurt.
On the civilian side reform, what does the city have to put in right now annually to balance the books?
Sure. So in our civilian pension, in the budget coming up, we have about $68 or so million in our general fund, and that's going to go up to around $70 million in the next couple of years, and then it actually starts coming down. So, you know, we're in the $70 million range annually that the city contributes in addition to what employees contribute.
Now, is that the full number, or is that the added that you have to put in to keep it?
That's the full number. That's the full number for civilians.
What are you having to put in to catch up? Because we know it was having problems.
Right. So the whole reform that has recently taken place, we've started to take care of the entire unfunded liability, and over the next 20 plus years, that liability will go to zero. So I'm not sure exactly the split of that 70 between, you know, the current obligations and paying down the principal on the mortgage, if you will, but it's somewhere in that $70 million range are both.
So with the reforms, I'm assuming, and that you have current employees that have a system that they signed on for.
That's right.
And then you have future and new employees that will have somewhat different benefit scheme.
That's correct.
As a city manager, and I know that's can be a difficult situation. You have same employee function, but they may have different. How do you deal with that in communicating to employees?
Yeah, and that's a great point, Kurt, because that is exactly what has led the mayor and the council right now to go for this next round of reform, because we have exactly that situation where you maybe started on June 30th of 2013 and you started on July 2nd, and your pension systems are different, and it doesn't feel fair to employees. And in fact, we have people not coming to work for the city or leaving early because they're having to pay so much if they're in that second group compared to the first group. So the reform is to put a cap on how much the second group of employees is paying to try and be able to keep employees. Right now, what we call our Tier 2 employees have the highest pension contribution of any city in the United States we can identify that also has Social Security. 15% of their pay is going to the pension. So this proposal that is coming would cap that at 11%, which is about what state employees are paying into their pension.
What are Tier 2 employees?
So Tier 2 employees are those who have been hired on July 1, 2013 or later.
Okay, it's not job type.
No, it's not job type. It's
date of hire.
It's when you came on board, exactly.
Okay.
To your point about doing the same job, just hired a little differently, and it's a different system.
There'll be a period of time where I'm sure it's a little bit rougher, but then over time, as more employees come on under the new system,
it evens out.
Yeah.
That's right.
Have you lost employees? I mean, have you done a study to find out how many employees you've lost?
We anecdotally have heard stories of people who are surprised when they actually get their first paycheck at how much is going, and they decide to leave. We've had a situation where people have looked at the offer that they're given, understanding that that 15% is coming out of what they're offered, and saying, I can't afford to work there. And that's troubling to us, because we're in a service business, and so people are what makes the difference for us, and so hiring quality people is really critical.
Now, some of the critics would say, and I actually probably come from this camp, it's still a very healthy plan. I mean, it's a very nice benefit. Many of us that own our own small businesses would love to be able to put 15% in and have a defined benefit retirement, and we don't. We have to self-fund our retirement, period.
Right, right.
It's a perk though, right?
Well, it's a benefit, and actually, it is different between the government sector and the private sector, and the Constitution has made it such. So it's very difficult to change the government sector pensions. But it's part of the pay package, it's part of the benefit package that attracts people to us. And I think we've been responsible at the city in reforming it within the law, but there's a little more we need to do, and that's what's coming up in the next couple weeks.
So it sounds like you have a handle, at least you're beginning to get a handle on the civilian side, which, as you mentioned, the city controls.
Correct.
But there is a bigger problem looming on the horizon, and that has to do with police and fire. And you don't have a whole lot of control over that, do you?
The public safety pension, the PSPRS, Public Safety Personnel Retirement System, is governed by the state. It's a statewide system, and we have very limited ability to change that. It's really done through the legislature, and so that's where the reform would need to take place.
Has the League of Cities looked at being a louder voice on that needed reform just to keep this thing viable?
Yeah, in fact, the League of Cities has convened a working group of city members. And also, interestingly enough, the fire union has taken the lead with the police union with them just to propose some reforms as well. And so we're at the beginning of those things starting to make their way into the public eye.
Would you predict in the future, I mean, I guess I would, but I would wonder if you agree that from your professional standpoint, we're going to end up with a public safety retirement that does the same thing. The current employees they were given a commitment and needs to be honored, but then new employees are going to have a different kind of defined retirement.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that's what we learned from that whole series of reforms that was attempted before at the state level, and what's called the Fields decision said you can't. The Constitution protects people for the system they're in when they're hired. You can't change the rules of the game on the government pension in the middle. Agree or disagree, that's what has been said the Constitution holds. So it has to be for moving forward, it has to be changes to employees after a future date.
Okay, the future is in doubt, and we'll find out exactly why it's in doubt and discuss some solutions when the 48th continues. Stay with us. Welcome back to the 48th. Our guest tonight is Mr. Ed Zuercher, the city manager for the city of Phoenix. We're talking about public safety pensions before we go back. We do want to talk about transportation.
Sure.
But first, one last thing. any fix for the public safety employees fund, that has to come from the state then, and with voter approval, right?
If the Constitution is going to be changed, it would have to be approved statewide by the voters, but the legislature controls it. And the fire union and the police union have started raising some proposals.
And how far away are we from something for voters to vote on?
Boy, it's hard for me to predict, but I wouldn't imagine we'd have anything this year. Probably 16 at the earliest.
Can we afford to wait that long?
We're going to have to figure it out. I think we're going to have to wait.
Every day the problem gets a little bigger.
Yeah, bigger and bigger.
The solution gets hard.
And anybody, did you know what the legislature is on top of this?
Actually, there has been a lot of discussion, and they're trying to let the folks that are most impacted by the system bring forth some.
So it's up for you
reforms.
to the cities to bring some proposals.
Yeah, as Kurt said, the League of Cities and Towns and the unions are trying to work on some solutions.
Okay, very good. In the city of Phoenix, a big issue is going to be a transit tax. Where do we stand on that, and how much is the city asking?
Well, it's a transportation plan, a comprehensive plan led by a group of citizens who are chaired by Mary Peters, the former U.S. Secretary of Transportation, and Marty Schultz, who's been a longtime state activist in transportation issues. And so it's a comprehensive plan for streets, buses, and light rail in the city of Phoenix, about a 30-year plan to improve our street conditions and continue to expand light rail and beef up our bus service.
And how much is it going to cost us?
So the entire tax would be 7/10 of a cent. Today, currently in Phoenix, it's 4/10. So the increment is about 1/3 of a cent, or about a penny on a $3 cup of coffee.
Okay, sounds reasonable, doesn't it, Kurt?
A tax is a tax is a tax. But with that said, tell us where are the routes, for example, for the trains that you'd see coming.
Sure. So the biggest piece of this where people have been paying attention is light rail, although it's actually not the biggest part of the proposal. The biggest part of the proposal is to beef up our bus service, to get it to 15-minute instead of, sometimes it's an hour between buses, 15 minutes between buses, run later at night, farther in the north and in the west, and all those sorts of things. There's also significant amount of street paving and sidewalk construction and those sorts of things in this. But the light rail piece, to your question about the routes, we're talking about really connecting economic centers. So there'd be a route to get Grand Canyon University connected on West Camelback, get to ASU West up at 51st and Thunderbird, South Central Avenue, Paradise Valley connecting into the system. So it's really the Capitol and I-10 West to 79th Avenue. So I'll bring all those parts together into a larger light rail system.
I don't think there'd be any argument about the sidewalks and streets and everything. I mean, because we do need that. But there is some contention regarding public transportation. Do you think that Phoenix, it almost sounds, to the critics at least, that you're trying to force public transportation down the throat of taxpayers?
Well, transportation is really about choices. Not everyone uses the same set of systems. I never drive on the Loop 303. I don't live in that part of town. It's not in my travel pattern. But the Loop 303 is an important part of our network in the valley to make goods and services move. There are other people who use light rail every day to get to work or to get to school. It's been the basis of why ASU has been so successful in downtown Phoenix. It connects Gateway Community College. 1 out of every 5 of our writers is going to school, and about 50% are going to work. So a huge percentage of people on transit are going to work or going to school. That's economic development, but it's all part of a big system. You can't isolate any one part and say, we don't need that little part. Well, the people who use that need it, and it keeps the whole system operating.
It's obviously a highly subsidized system. I mean, from a critic standpoint, it's a subsidized system.
Yeah, our streets are highly subsidized. No, really.
That's a fair,
yeah.
that's fair, but transit is subsidized.
Yes.
And from last I read, it's about the subsidy is the paying customer is paying about 40% of the cost. 60% is being subsidized through the tax.
Yeah, that's roughly the breakdown.
Do you see that number changing? Is there a long-term plan that we want to get to 50-50? We want to get to 60-40?
That's a good question, but actually that's a high number for any transit system. So generally speaking, if you're at 30% fare recovery, you're doing pretty well, and we're higher than 30% in the valley. But I think the issue is that streets and transit are part of economic development. They're part of an amenity of a community, not even an amenity, a necessity for us to be successful. We talk about public safety. Public safety officers have to have good streets. We talk about job creation, economic development. People have to be able to get to work, and they have to be able to get to school so they can prepare themselves for that. Every part of transportation in this country is subsidized. We think that freeways and streets are free or pay for themselves, but we're paying for those things through sales taxes.
Right.
So someone who never drives a car
Gas
is paying
tax.
taxes for streets.
Right.
Gas tax doesn't cover all the costs of that. So it's part of a large network, and this proposal in Phoenix would bolster that in the city.
When do you think when is the city going to get a chance to vote on this?
So Frank, they're targeting the election in August 24th or 25th, I forget what the exact day is. The election in Phoenix would be when the voters could weigh in on the proposal.
Going back to, there's also provisions in there, I believe, to hire additional police officers. Is that in the, so that's in the transportation?
Well,
We have about 10 seconds.
Yeah, it's not directly that way, but basically what happens is if the tax is passed, it frees up some money we're currently spending on transit from our general fund. The council said they'd direct that money to hire more police officers.
Very good.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
We'll be right back.